Okay, then today we're going to do Vayeshev, which is and he dwelt. So this is from the book of Bereshit, or Genesis, chapters 27, verse 1 to chapter 40, verse 23.
37.
Sorry.
That would be a
37
long read.
Yeah. But we're not going to do a lot of reading direct on the scripture, but we need to discuss it because there's just a lot in these verses.
Go ahead and sit down, guys.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's just a lot in these verses that we need to go through and see how they really pan out, what they really are talking about. Because as in most of God's word, it's not always the literal that you learn from. But when you see what the literal is talking about and can enter into that, see what God's really telling us.
Well, and it's really applicable.
And it's
So
really
many times that we
applicable.
look, especially in the Tanakh, or specifically in the Pentateuch, and we think, well, look at all these stories. You know, we've got all these stories, and yes, we can learn from the stories. But we're told, Shaul told his son, Timothy, that all scripture is applicable. So even in the
Right.
stories that we seem to know so well, there's so total application to our life.
Absolutely. There's just so much in that. So let's go ahead and get started. Now we know in the previous parashah, we saw the relationship between Yaakov and Esau. A relationship that was finally reconciled, but it still ended with them parting. They were both very prosperous, and that's one of the reasons they had to part. They were so prosperous that there wasn't enough room, and remember, this was all agricultural and, raising animals. It was so prosperous, there wasn't enough room in the area for both of them. So that's how God was blessing them. Even though we know that God has his favorites, you can see he was blessing both of them. He was reaching out to both of them. But in your first fill-in here, we have Yaakov and Esau parted because they were both prosperous. So in Genesis, chapter 35, verses 1 to 3, God said to Yaakov, "Get up, go to Bethel and live there, and make there an altar to God, who appeared to you when you fled. Esau your brother, when you fled Esau your brother. Then Yaakov said to his household and to all the others with him, get rid of the foreign gods that you have with you. Purify yourselves and put on fresh clothes. We're going to move on and go up to Bethel. There I will build an altar to God, who answered me when I was in such distress and stayed with me wherever I went." It's really important here to look at what he's saying. He's telling all the people that are with him, get rid of those foreign gods. We don't want to have anything to do with them anymore. And then put on clean clothes. Because dealing with the foreign gods, even if you're throwing them away, still defiles you to some degree. And this is one of the purposes of a mikvah, and changing your clothes.
Actually, that alludes to the process of having a mikvah before you put clean clothes on.
Absolutely. So we need to realize God is holy, and he is set apart for a reason. And that reason is because he alone is God, and he alone is to be worshipped. So in your second fill-in, Yaakov followed Hashem. And then in Genesis chapter 36, verses 6 through 8, Esau took his wives, his sons and daughters, the others in his household, his cattle and other animals, and everything else he owned, which he had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went off to a country distant from his brother Jacob, for their possessions had become too great for them to live together, and the countryside through which they were traveling couldn't support so much livestock. So even as they were traveling, they realized along the road that wasn't where God was sending him. And how did they know? Because they could see that the land would not support them until they continued to follow God. What we get out of this, if we're traveling through life, guess what? We're going to go through areas where we don't know what's going on. So this doesn't look right to us. We don't want to stay here. And why? Because we're traveling through. We're on a destination to go where God wants us to be. Not where we are right now. Not where we're standing right now. We're not looking back, but we're looking to where God wants us to be. And we know we have to trust that he is leading us there. Like the word says, you lean not to your own understanding, but in all things look to God. If we keep looking at our own understanding, and I know I'm guilty of this, well, I'm here, I've got to fix it, I've got to make it right, I've got to make it so it's doable. Guess what? That's not always God's plan. So I'm saying, God, you stand over there, I'm going to try to take care of this. And that doesn't work. Well, we can see, even in this story, they could see along the way, well, this isn't right. I know this isn't ready for me. God does have a place, and he will lead me there. That's what we need to do.
If God is trying to teach us something along
Absolutely.
our journey, if we intercede or we intervene is a better word, then we really haven't learned what it is that God wants us to learn. And guess what? We go around that mountain one more time. Because God will cause circumstances in our lives for us then to walk into what he's prepared for us.
Yep.
So it's a lot easier to do it willingly than it is screaming, scratching, and clawing because we want to do it our way.
But how many times do we do that? As we can see in Genesis 36, verses 6 through 8, Esau took his wives, his sons and daughters, and others in his household, along with everything else, and I'm abbreviating it, and went to the land of Canaan. Why did he do that? Well, as it says in number C in your fill out, Esau followed his wives. Because remember, that's where his wives were from. So he was going back there. But in Genesis 37:1, Jacob continued living in the land where his father had lived as a foreigner, in the land of Canaan. Jacob knew what God had given his father, and he knew that that's what he was inheriting. So that's where he wanted to stay. And we can see from this that Esau entered into the portion of the land and received their allotment, Mount Seir and the land of Edom. Jacob, on the other hand, continued to wait for the land promised to his fathers, and he dwelt in the land where his fathers had sojourned, an alien in the land of promise. Are we still aliens in the land of promise? I believe we are. Regardless of what we have, what we think we have, we're looking for a better place. And we're looking forward to the promise that God has given us. We're not content to sit back on our laurels, and again, well, I can make do with this. I can make it happen. No. God can make it happen, and he'll do it in his time. Not necessarily in my time. We all have the opportunity to make the same choice. We can take our inheritance now, where we're at, what we have, and say, God, you're making it good for me here. I'm satisfied. Now I'm just going to do what I can with this, and I'll see you later. Or we can say, no, God, I'll make the best of where you have me right now. But I'm still looking.
Looking for the land.
Looking for the land.
Looking for the land. I'm looking forward. My eyes are looking forward to the land of promise.
Exactly. So we can see in your fill in and D, we can take our inheritance now or in the kingdom. And that's not to say that Hashem won't bless us now, because He does. But as we can see throughout this parasha, we need to continue in the Lord and not in our own surroundings. Where we're at now is temporary. Where we're at now is God making us better to live in His kingdom. We can see in this parasha that the sons of Yaakov, or Jacob, or Bnei Yisrael, the sons of Israel, the children of Israel, and the modern world refers to these characters as the Jewish people, even though technically Jewish people are only from the tribe of Judah or from the land of Judea. Not all Hebrews are Jewish or are Jews. That terminology has kind of filtered down and stuck. But some Jewish people or some Hebraic people still get offended by that. But what's more important is we see throughout this whole parasha that our attitude and our behavior matters to Hashem. What are we doing? How are we looking at where we're at? How do we look at where we're going? We need to see that Hashem uses the circumstances. Yes, Maria?
See, I got a different outlook on that.
Okay.
Because Jacob was told by his mother to go to the land and get a wife,
Right.
which he did not do. He spent 14 years in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Then he went, and instead of getting a wife, he stayed there for 14 years getting 2 wives. In that time, his mother sent a message and his father to come back. And that was the time that Laban told him about getting money. So he
Correct.
stayed there 6 years after he was told by his parents to come home.
Yep.
And then after 6 years, when things got a little dicey up where he was, it took him 2 years to get back home.
Absolutely.
That's 22 years
Yep.
that he disobeyed. 22 years that he should not have spent up there. And if you look at how God works, Joseph was kidnapped at the age of 17. Jacob did not see his son until the age of 39.
Yep.
The difference of 22 years. The same thing that he did to his parents, it came back to him measure for measure.
And actually, we're going to get into that.
That was a punishment.
And actually, we're going to get into that in a little bit later here. But you're right. If you're disobedient to God, how can He bless you?
His parents.
And what you
God
do,
he's very particular about his commandments.
yes, he is. And the sins of the father go down to the children.
Measure for measure.
Measure for measure. And we can see that through here, and like I say, we'll get into that in just a little bit. But our point here in your fill in for E is our attitude and behavior matter to Hashem. It's whatever we do, whatever we think, he's watching us. As you said, Maria, he was disobedient. Because he was disobedient, he had to work all that time. Because he was disobedient, he had to go through all that. But God was still watching out for him.
You didn't have to.
Well, because of his promises, he
had
did.
just one wife. He was told to go
You need
there,
to use
get
them.
a wife.
Sorry.
He was told, go up, get a wife, come back.
Yep.
He didn't. He went up, and because of Rachel, he worked 7 years and got the wrong one. He worked another 7 years. And then because he wanted money, he worked 6 years.
Yep.
And because of the hatred of his brother, it took him 2 years to get back home.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
But that wasn't his fault, that,
Use the
It
microphone,
wasn't his
Frank,
fault.
so they can hear
Yes,
you.
it was.
because she held up, because the father had withheld the wife he wanted.
No, that was his fault. He knew what he was getting into because Rachel gave signals to Leah, and Jacob knew because Rachel said, "My father is going to do this. So the night we get married, I'm going to give you some hand signals so you would know that it's me." And then Rachel went to Leah and said, when you go to the bridal chamber, he's going to ask you if you're Rachel. Say yes, and these are the hand signals. Leah was not an ugly person. She was a beautiful person. The man was 83 years old. Rachel was 15 years old. Not that I want to harp on that, you know, but it was, you know, you think of that. He was supposed to have one wife, and just because he got snookered into getting a second wife, he didn't have to. He did not have, and he did not have to stay 6 years accumulating. By the time he left Laban, his father-in-law, he had over 600,000 animals. He didn't need that much.
You know something, we make choices so many times based on what our own personal preferences are, our own choices, because we think we know better than God. But unfortunately, what happens is the fathers, the parents, are really poor trends for their children. And we saw that all the way back with Abraham, with Isaac and Ishmael, right? Because Sarah tried to fix it. You know, God's slow, so let me fix it. So it has kind of set up a thing for the rest of the patriarchs. Look at Yaakov and Esau, right? And we're also now going to look at of Joseph and his brothers. So we see this contention that was built up from the very beginning, and it just snowballs. So when this contention, when God says, this is what I want you to do through his parents, right? He had better ideas. He said, well, I'll tell you what, hey, I'm going to get a little bit drunk. This is my opinion. I'm going to get a little bit soused. And I really am not going to pay attention to who I'm sleeping with. Exactly, right? And then the next morning goes, oh my gosh, what did I do, right? So then it's okay, I'll work to get who I wanted to get. Well then, well, God's blessing me here. Maybe I'll just stay a little bit longer and get blessed more. We try to outthink and outwork God. And it doesn't work. There's always ramifications to pay. Correct? Always. Measure for measure. So as Doug said, he kind of set this up. And I want to look at Bereshit, or Genesis 37, 2 through 4. And it says, let me get down here. These are the records of the generations of Yaakov. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a varicolored or multicolored coat. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not even speak to him on friendly terms. Joseph was 17, and he was working with his brothers. He was supposed to be attending the flocks. But it says that Joseph brought bad reports of them to their father. We got to look at the pronouns. So basically, Joseph is out in the field, supposed to be helping, shepherding the flock, and he goes back home, and he says, Dad, you won't believe what those brothers are doing. They're not watching the flock. They're doing this, or they're doing that, or they're doing this. He brought back a bad report. Now, this is the first of several reasons that Joseph's brother hated him. So, in your first fill-in, we'll see that there are 3 reasons that Joseph's brother hated him. And the first of these reasons was that he was a snitch. He was a tattletale. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to watch my brothers. And my father loves me better than he really loves them. So I'm going to go out there and I'm going to see what they're doing. And I'm going to go home and tell Daddy, and Daddy will get all upset with them. Basically, that's what you've got. You've got a tattletale and a snitch. You've got a spoiled kid acting like a brat. Right? And we don't really think about that, but that's what he was. So your second fill-in is he was a snitch and he was a tattletale. Now, we really don't know what he was reporting to his father, but, it wasn't probably the best things in the world. He didn't go home and say, those guys are really working hard out there. They're protecting your flock. That wasn't what he was said, because his report to his dad antagonized his brothers. Now, I'm sure, just like any other parent, when a kid comes home and says, do you know what my brother did? Or do you know what, it happened in school, the parent goes on and he usually confronts them, don't we? What did you do in school? What happened, right? I was telling a story a little bit earlier that our son skipped a couple classes in high school. And because he went to a very small school in St. Helena, a very small school in the Napa Valley, they could tell. I mean, the kids would sit out on the quadrangle and I would call and say, oh yeah, Eric's out there, I'll go get him. And I got a call saying, that Eric skipped this class. And this is the 3rd time he skipped it in the last semester. Well, who's the first person I go to? This is before everybody else was wrong and your kids were right. And I said, yeah, before everybody was woke. And I said, did you skip those classes? And don't tell me you didn't do it, because I'm not asking you. I'm telling you. And he said, well, yeah, Mom, but this and but that, but this and but that. And I said, well, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. Next time they call me and you've skipped a class, I am going to go to school with you. Now, my son at this time was a senior in high school, and he's what, 6'3.5", 6'4", big guy. And I said, I'm going to go to school with you, and I'm going to pull my desk right next to you, and I'm going to hold hands with you between classes, and I'm going to enter into every conversation that you have. Guess what? He never skipped another class. So I'm sure that Yaakov told his other sons, don't you ever do that again, because I believe what your brother Joseph is telling me. And if it happens again, there's going to be ramifications. Now, this didn't win any brownie points with his brothers. You know, it didn't make him very favorable. Oh, okay. So this caused some antagonism between the two. And I'm sure that this wasn't the first time that Joseph had run and tattled on his brothers. He was 17 years old, so I'm sure he was very experienced at it. So, you know, this could very easily be the first reason that his brothers had hated him. Now, we do know that Israel loved Joseph more than all of his other sons, and that is your second fill-in. And Israel was very, very clear that Joseph was his favorite. He didn't hide it. It was right out there in front. And I am sure that this is the second reason that his brothers were antagonistic or didn't care for him. Yes, ma'am.
Was it also the tunic that Jacob gave to Joseph?
Yep.
Saying that he now had the privilege and the rights of the firstborn?
Yep. And I'm getting to that. So I'm glad you brought that up. You know, he made but Israel didn't even make a pretense of covering up his favoritism. He didn't even make a pretense. I'm sure that maybe he sat next to him at the dinner table, where the place of the firstborn should have been. I'm sure that he sought Joseph out for conversation, where maybe he didn't seek out all the other brothers for conversation, for more of an intimate relationship. And you know, yes, Joseph was the firstborn son of his beloved Rachel, and he was also the son of his old age. Now, given the family chaos that Israel had experienced or Yaakov had experienced within his own family, Esau and Yaakov, right? Don't you kind of think that Yaakov would have been a little more wary about showing favoritism? Because do you remember the chaos that brought about? Remember, his older brother Esau, his father favored, and his mother favored him. And it actually ended up then with the blessings of the firstborn going to Yaakov through trickery, which caused chaos in the family. Yaakov left. He was afraid of Esau. Even when he came back, he said, "Oh, Esau's going to kill me." So, and I thought it was really kind of unique to look at the way that he was going to take care of his wives and protect his wives. His first wife was placed in the middle with her children, right? His concubines were placed behind them. And then Rachel was placed in front, or excuse me, it was the third one back. So what happened is, if Esau decided to attack and kill his family, his favorite would be in the far back. So this caused massive chaos within their family. So it seems like he would have learned from the past. Unfortunately, we don't. You know, how many of us have gone around that mountain one more time? Oh yeah, many times, right? We go around that mountain one more time. But, you know, if human beings learned from others' mistakes, the world would be a beautiful place. Yes. Wouldn't it? Yes. We could read it and say, "Oh boy, I'm never going to do that," and really mean it. You know, one way to describe the human condition is this: people rarely learn from other people's lives. You've just been crowned, right?
Yeah, in the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6, we're taught to pray, deliver us from evil. And in the Hebrew idiom, what that means is teach us the easy way. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. So you're praying, Lord, teach me the easy way. Teach me the easy way. I was talking about this yesterday. You can learn. Here's the deal. You're going to learn.
Right.
Period. Simple as that. Because God's started to work in you, and He's going to complete the work. So this is not optional. You're not pushed ahead. This is no child left behind scenario. You either pass or you fail, and if you fail, you're doing it again. It's that simple. And so you're going to learn the lesson. You have the choice of learning it the easy way or the hard way. And the problem is, just like the patriarchs, it's a long line of dysfunction.
They were all dysfunctional families.
The father of the faith sold his wife into sexual slavery. Although the sex part never really happened, that
was God's doing.
That was God's doing. And the rabbis teach that undoubtedly was not an overnight event. It was probably 9 months to a year long, where she was in the court of Pharaoh, because he finally came to his realization by realizing no woman in the kingdom was getting pregnant. Well, that's going to take some time to figure that one out. So then Isaac comes along and does exactly the same thing with his wife. This is dysfunction. Isaac blesses Jacob with the intent of blessing Esau, because he says he's dying. He lives another 42 years. Isaac is an abdicator. It's simple as that. So the point that I'm making is, all of us come from dysfunctional families. I've never met a functional family yet.
That's right.
I mean, I don't care how messed up your family was, I can show you somebody that's worse. You're not the bottom of the heap, I can promise you that. There's so much dysfunction. We were dealing with somebody yesterday after service, just the dysfunction in the family, and it goes all the way back to the mother's childhood. And it's just like what we're seeing here. So we have to realize that just because you say the sinner's prayer and you come to faith, it's a brand new beginning in one way, but it's not a brand new beginning in every way.
We still bring our past with us.
Baggage with you.
Yeah.
And so what are you working out? You're working out your salvation. You're working out the deliverance and the freedom from that baggage. Because that baggage is what's messing up your life. So we really have to remember this, because all too often as believers we think, well, I'm a believer now, so God is just going to, nothing's in my way. And that's really not true. We have to deal with our issues. And like I said, I always pray, Lord, teach me what I have to learn the easy way. Because I've learned after all these years, you're gonna learn it. Hard or easy, you choose.
Well, and one of the things that James tells us, Yaakov tells us, is consider it all good when you encounter various trials, not temptations, but trials, because trials are made so that we will look at ourselves and change, hopefully, and move on. So one of the things I pray is, when is not lead me from temptation. It's Father, keep deliver me from harsh trials, because God's going to continue giving me trials in my life until I fall into what He wants me to do.
That's where I pray, be gentle, Lord.
Yeah, be gentle, Lord. Right? Be gentle, Lord.
One thing we need to realize too, that the word grace, which English translations has taken out of the Old Testament for some reason, but the word grace, both in the Hebrew and in the Greek, does not necessarily mean unmerited favor. It means favor. Sometimes you have to merit that favor before He comes through.
We're all
As
a
we
work
can
in
see that
progress.
all the way through the Word, people fell out of grace because of their actions. But when they repented and turned back and got on the right path, then the grace came in.
Then the grace came back. We want a easy, quick microwave faith
Oh, yeah.
to maturity.
Sounds good to me.
God's not a sugar daddy,
And God's not a sugar daddy, he's not a microwave,
It's not.
right?
and he's not an enabler.
No,
it's not
absolutely.
an enabler.
Absolutely not. You know, we see to be programmed and to learn only from our own mistakes. And even that's hardly guaranteed because we're not very introspective people. We want to blame everybody else for our actions or for our own failings. Absolutely. And we read in verse 3 that the two previous reasons weren't enough. His father gave him an ornate tunic. Now, some translations call it a coat of multicolors. Other translations just say it's ornate. But whatever it was a sign that he was granted favor, that he had authority, and that he had his father's absolute blessing. So it'd be like walking around with a sign around your neck that says, I have all my father's blessings and inheritance right now. So that didn't.
Just an aside, on one of our studies, they were doing some excavation in Egypt, and they came across an area, and one of the main buildings in the area they uncovered had the walls painted multicolored, which they thought was just like the cloak.
Yeah, they think they have
So
found
think it was,
the Egyptian entombment
right.
of where Joseph may have been entombed.
Yeah, actually, the Hebrew word that's actually used here is the word paz, P-A-S.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
Right.
it literally means from the hand to the foot. So it was a full
That's right.
covering cloak, which was unusual.
correct.
Well,
those
especially for a
days.
shepherd.
Yeah, so it covered, it went all the way down to the palm. Pause is the palm of the hand, and then all the way down to the feet.
Right.
So that's the actual Hebrew word that's used. It's not, has nothing to do with multicolor. That's just the way our translators chose to translate it. But it really symbolizes more royalty, and so none of your skin is exposed at all.
Well, and then on top of everything, Joseph wore it out to the grazing land of his brothers where he had the sheep. So it wasn't like, well, I'm going to keep this for special occasions. It's in your face. I'm my father's favorite, and look what he gave me and what it means. So, that wasn't actually the way to win friends and influence people, right? It was right in your face. So his brothers even became more jealous of him. And one thing led to another. And the word tells us that they actually hated him. And they couldn't speak a friendly word to him. Now that word actually is shalom. It says they couldn't even speak to him in peace. There was contention every time they even interfaced with him in any way, shape, or form. Can't you just imagine them coming back from tending the sheep, maybe to a supper? And here's Joseph, all decked out. And I can even see him grumbling, see that guy over there? I mean, he's at it again, right? So they had this constant contention going on within their family. And what happened to Yaakov's family is one of the most destructive things that can happen to any family. Family members either not speaking to each other or just not even speaking civilly to or about each other. That's one of the most destructive things that can happen within a family. This breakdown in communication enables family members to demonize one another because the end results of demonization, as in many cases, of one parent alienating a child from the other parent, such as in divorce. We hear all that all the time. Well, your mother did this, or well, your father did this, or this and this and this. And the child is the one that ends up the real victim. So in this case, as hard as it may sound, the brothers were victims of a very dysfunctional family. And we'll find out as we go along that this is one of the things that enabled Joseph's brother to contemplate murdering him or selling him into slavery without even speaking a single word to him. Now, we read in verses 4 through 13 that Joseph will now add insult to injury. Yes, ma'am.
Pastor Paul wants to.
Okay, and I have no idea how to do that.
Okay, I told him to unmute himself. Pastor Paul?
Pastor Paul?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the things you just said is very interesting because Joseph obviously represents or is a forerunner of what Yeshua was also going
Yes.
to do. And as a son, he also did exactly the same thing that Joseph did.
Yes,
He didn't wear a special coat, but he walked around in the name of the Father, saying, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, which really irritated a lot of people, obviously.
right, and he even said, you know, if you want to be accepted by the Father, then do what I do.
And on top of that, the thing about grace is that Yeshua was not shown grace. He actually earned the grace because of his actions, which goes right along with what you said just previously about grace. It's not always unmerited favor. Sometimes it's favor because it's deserved.
That's right.
And that's exactly what Yeshua did. He said, I don't say anything and I don't do anything except for what I see and I hear the Father doing,
Right.
which actually then facilitates the one thing that most of us don't truly understand, which is the difference between belief and faith. Faith is always predicated by the fact that God has initiated the faith. In other words, he speaks, you listen, and that imputes faith into you. It's not something that you drum up or you build up by what you believe.
Right.
That's all.
Okay. Good point.
One more. Go
Yes.
ahead, Debbie. Debbie, can you hear us? Go ahead, Debbie.
Tell Debbie to unmute herself.
Debbie, you have to unmute so we can hear you.
Okay, go ahead, Debbie.
Unmute. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. The question for me?
No, you had a question?
Oh, no, I don't have a question.
It's nice
No,
to
I
see
don't.
you.
Hi.
Hi.
Tell her to unmute herself.
Mute yourself then again, Debbie. You know, in the next verses, we start looking at Joseph again as insult to injury. You know, it's not good enough to do it just 3 times. Now he's going to do it even 1 time more. Joseph's dreams came from God. God gave those dreams to Joseph. But in his youthful arrogance and his lack of judgment, right, led him to not only share his dreams with his brothers, but to brag of them to his brothers. Now, here it says, behold, hear this dream which I have dreamed.
Blow the trumpets.
I mean, it's right, like, here I come to save the day, right? Now, the actual Hebrew word here is hene, which means behold, and it's an imperative word. And really interestingly, I did some search on it, and that it's used 119 times in the first 20 chapters of Bereshit. And from chapter 1 through 19, it's only used when God says, behold. It's an imperative. Pay attention to what I'm saying. It's a commandment. Pay attention. Listen to what I'm going to tell you, because what I've got to say to you is important. So Joseph uses that same word, walks up to his brothers in the field in his tunic, right? I'm sure standing really tall and marching, and he announces to himself, to his brothers, "Behold, I have had a dream." Now, do you see it's first person singular? Nowhere does it say that God gave me a dream. And I don't think God said, go out and share this dream with the world. But he comes in and says, I have had a dream. This is the ultimate of arrogance. Absolute, the ultimate of arrogance. And this caused him to hate him even more, right? I mean, it's like rubbing your nose in it.
Yeah, when we get a word from God, I'm always sharing this. Timing and delivery are just as important as the word.
Delivery, absolutely.
And this is why I teach people, if you think you've got a word during a service, don't come up and say, "Thus saith the Lord." That's like saying, "Behold."
Mm-hmm.
And because once you say, "Thus saith the Lord," you're saying you're right, and now you're putting everybody else on the chopping block.
That's right.
If they don't quite acknowledge it or agree with it. And that's assuming that you deliver everything exactly the right way, and so on and so forth. It's better to say, I think I've got a word from the Lord. You throw it out there, and then let the prophets, like it says in Corinthians, it says, let the people judge the word. You don't have to tell somebody, "Thus saith the Lord, this is a word for you." Let the people judge it. All you are then is don't shoot the messenger.
Right.
Does that make sense? Very important that we do that, because once you say, "Thus saith the Lord," you are in somebody's face.
And their back goes up.
Their back goes up, and it never goes well.
Mm-mm. Absolutely not. One of the things that I have found that works for me is if God has given me something that he wants me to say to someone else, I will always say, "Does this ring true with you?"
Yeah, that's a good way.
Or I say, this is what the Spirit has impressed upon me. Does this ring true with you? Because I'm not God. I don't, I'm doing the best I can to discern what he's told me. But also then it doesn't put the other person on the defensive. Right? So, nothing like rubbing salt in an open wound, right? It says, there they were, all the brothers, and he's telling them, all you brothers were in the field, right? And we were cutting the wheat and putting them into sheaths. But suddenly my sheath rose up, and it stood upright, and your sheaves bowed low to my sheaf. Now,
Bold statement.
this really isn't hard to discern what he's telling you. You don't need a prophet to come down and say the underlying meaning of this. They knew exactly. The brothers answered, "Do you mean you're going to reign over us? Right? Are you going to rule over us?" Now, he was pretty lucky that they didn't stone him on the spot after saying something like that. But they hated him even more. And this is the third time that we read that the brothers hated him in just 5 verses. He was not making friends and influencing people, was he? Not at all. And if that weren't enough, guess what? He had another dream. And he hightails it right back out to the field. We can look at this and say, that was the most stupid thing. What do you do? Take his brain out and play with it? Come on, what's going on here? But no, he goes right back out to the field. And guess what he addresses them with again? "Behold, I had another dream. And this time, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me."
Yeah.
You talk about arrogance. Unlike his first dream, he shared this one, though, with his entire family, his father included. Now, we read in verse 10, and it says, he related it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers, excuse me, actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? Now, we've got to remember here that the mother wasn't around anymore. But what he was alluding to was, you're saying that the entire clan, the entire family are going to bow down to you? Again, ultimate in arrogance. But his father did have the good sense to rebuke him at this time. Perhaps his father realized that his favoritism had gotten totally out of control. And he decided, maybe I've created a bit of a monster out there. I've created a real brat. Because it's contention in the family. They can't even talk civilly to each other. And maybe he wanted his other children to see that there was a limit to what he could be pushed, how far Joseph could push him. That he could get angry with Joseph too. Perhaps he realized, that he was outraged by Joseph's suggestion that he, his father, would bow down to him. And Yaakov tried to dismiss the legitimacy of Joseph's dream as being absolutely absurd. You can get by with that with your brothers, but you can't get by with that from me. Now, Yaakov was making it very clear how absurd the dream was, in the hope that his brothers would kind of simply dismiss it rather than continue to be so angry and envious of him. Maybe they said, well, if my father can rebuke him and put him, set him back on his haunches a little bit, maybe he'll cool it. Maybe he'll cool his heels. But guess what? That didn't happen. Envy and festering anger leads to bad outcomes. And we're going to see that that's what happened. They lead to bad outcomes. Envy is poisonous, and it leads to bad behavior and bad attitudes. So does anger that's allowed to fester. Have you ever been angry and you just mull on it, and you feed it, and you water it, and you tend it because you're righteously angry?
Yeah, can you imagine if he, we understand that what his dreams came to pass. His dreams were from God. There's no doubt about that. But even the bowing down, think about that. That, in this context right here, it almost sounds as if you're going to realize that I am like the Messiah and I'm special and you're going to bow to me. No, they bow to him really under a pretense, in a sense. He's the second most powerful man in the world. And they don't even realize it's him.
Right.
They think it's the second most powerful man in Egypt. So they bow, which was the correct protocol. So it wasn't like what they were imagining here, I don't think. Can you imagine if, and remember, how many times did Yeshua, and this is still known as a Jewish trait to this day, Jews answer a question with a question. One of the reasons for that is it's because it changes the delivery aspect. What if Joseph had gone to his family and said, guys, I had the strangest dream. Here's what I saw. What do you guys think about this? Then, you know what they would have done? They would have midrashed, because that was the Jewish way to do things.
It's the deliverance.
It's the delivery of these things. It's the way you present it. And so what the Brit Hadashah tells us, Yeshua tells us, through Rabbi Shaul and the other writings, he says, you know what? Esteem others more highly than yourself. Take time to think, how is this going to affect other people? When you say this, we run into believers all the time that say, well, it's the truth, so I'm just going to lay it out. Well, you can do that, but I may lay you out. You know what I'm saying? It isn't good. Present it in a way that's palatable, and people will get it. These guys already understood it. That's clear.
Yeah.
So we all need to work on that. And I was also gonna add, Joseph was young, and he had an arrogant problem. There's no doubt, and it took years of prison
That's
to
right.
get that out of him. And I think that's one of the reasons Joseph ended up in prison.
Absolutely. Because God had to take him in order to use him to save his family. He had to take him from arrogance to humility.
He had to become like Messiah.
Absolutely.
He's not like Messiah.
No,
here, right?
no.
And he is a type of Messiah.
He's
so-
actually called the suffering Messiah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's actually called the suffering Messiah. Yes.
Thank you.
We need like 3 mics on this table.
In verse 12, where it says, then his brothers went to pasture. And in the Hebrew scriptures it says the sheep, not the father's flock. There is, when they have the sheep, they have 2 dots over the olive and the tav.
Very
Do you know why?
beginning and the end?
Huh?
Beginning and the end?
Yeah, that's the beginning, the end, but why did they put the 2 dots over
I don't know.
it?
Tell us.
It says here that the 2 dots represented that when they went to pasture, they took the flock up to Shechem,
Shechem?
and they went into the city, and they were in R&R. They were eating and drinking
Yes.
and just self-indulging themselves. And if you read further down, it says that Israel told Joseph, come, I will send you to them. And Joseph said to him, I will go. Now, you're saying that he's a type of Yeshua. Now there, the brothers are up there drinking, getting drunk. They're the lost sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph is Yeshua. The
Right.
Father says, go.
We see a lot of parallels in his
And
life.
that's when Yeshua said, God, he was sent for the lost sheep of Israel.
The other thing I found very interesting in that same verse is that his father sent him up there to look after the welfare of his flock. So I think the father kind of knew that the brothers were going to run amok. He said, well, I better send Joseph up to see if the flock's going to survive them.
You know,
That's shalom too. Well,
That's shalom. Mhm.
you read about this and you're thinking, now here is this man who's been around, Jacob. He knows that his sons
Yeah.
hate this other son. They want to kill him, and yet he says, hey, I want you to go all the way up there by yourself and talk to your brothers. I would have sent an army. Why did he send Joseph all by himself?
Why did God send Yeshua by himself?
That's God. That's God. Because he knew about Matthew 15 where he says, I sent you for the lost sheep of Israel. But, you know, Jacob knew what's going on.
Oh yeah. He was not
You don't send
uninformed
a
of what was going on.
17-year-old on a trip all the way from where he is all the way up, which is about what, 75 miles away?
it's arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
You don't send
That's-
a 17-year-old that's arrogant.
Yeah.
No. Well, and not only that, but they sent them to the area of Shechem. And what happened in Shechem? That
There
wasn't
were
really
only
the most
women
friendly
there.
place. Yeah, it wasn't the most receiving place for the Hebrews
Sodom and Gomorrah.
because of what
The circumcision.
right, they had gone in, the family had gone
They own
in.
that place now.
Yeah, the family had gone in. Remember, the two sons had gone in and killed everybody
All the males, they
Mhm.
saved the women.
after they had convinced them that they need to be circumcised, right? That's like insult to injury.
You know, should have been a bartender. This dysfunction, this really is a story of dysfunction. Because we have Joseph, who is a type and shadow of the Messiah. So we know what the outcome is supposed to be. And in fact, we know what it's going to be. He is a type and shadow of the Messiah. But all this dysfunction is just swirling around. I mean, for Jacob to send his bratty little 17-year-old to do a dangerous mission in a dangerous territory was just stupid. I mean, stupid is what stupid does. So, you know, you can't argue with that. So everything is dysfunctional. The brothers hate Joseph so much, they literally they're going to kill him.
Right.
They're going to kill him. And when there's that much hatred in the room, don't tell me Jacob didn't understand that.
No.
He did know that. And so this is a lesson for us because our families are so dysfunctional.
Right.
So honest to gosh, sometimes when I'm ministering or even when I'm looking at my own situation, I go, we are so twisted up in dysfunction. I don't know how we're ever going to get out of this. And I know the right answer, the Lord. Come on, I know that. But how do you untie this fishing knot?
For the grace of God.
It's crazy making. So what we have to do, and we have to understand that we talked about this a little bit earlier, the sins of the fathers are passed down
That's
to the
right.
third and fourth generation. So you can't help what landed on you. Okay? But if you can get your life untangled through the help of a Messiah, then your family line from this day forth can begin to experience. Now, if all your kids are grown and mature, well, they're stuck with all of the stuff. But at some point, we have to break that generational line so that our future generations have a shot at things. And it's so important. You're not struggling to get free for yourself so much as you're struggling for freedom for your great-grandchildren.
That's right.
And I mean, I've got a couple of great-grandchildren, and I want to tell you, already I can see the dysfunction all the way down into my great-grandchildren. It's already there. There's no way I'm going to get rid of that now. They're going to deal with that, and they're going to have to fight that battle on their own. But if we can break family lines here, then they can stop being passed on. And we've got to really learn this. And this is what this story
Absolutely.
in large degree is all about. Teaching us, guys, it's not hopeless, even though, you know, you're in a mess and your family's in a mess. Don't give up the ship, because you can affect future generations.
And you know, we see that so often. You know, a great-grandfather was an alcoholic. Grandfather was an alcoholic. You know, father was an alcoholic. And so then when the son sits around tipping the booze, well, that's just what our family does. When more subtle, you see that a husband treats his wife disrespectfully. And you see that after generation after generation after generation. We say, well, that's just the way our family is. Or you have a woman that puts up with things, or is slack in what she should be doing as far as caring for the family. Well, I was never nurtured. My grandmother was never nurtured. My great-grandmother was never ever nurtured. That's just the way we are. And somewhere along the line, we've got to say enough. It's got to stop somewhere, just like Pastor Bruce said. It's enough. But unfortunately, that takes courage, it takes guts, and it causes some more strife within the family. Because you've said no more. No more.
Pastor Paul has a question.
Oh, yes, Pastor Paul.
Go ahead, Pastor Paul.
All right, we kind of passed the subject a little bit, but that's all right. I just wanted to mention that with Yeshua, he also needed to be perfected through the things that he suffered.
Right.
And, you know, we don't, when we try to put that into context, we struggle with that because we think of Yeshua as being God and being perfect. But we have to really understand that he was a man on the earth and that God was perfecting him to use him in the capacity he desired. With Joseph, we have the same kind of thing. Joseph was favored, there's no doubt. And favoritism in a family is a dysfunctional
Yes, it is.
reality. But the favoritism of Joseph was a favoritism that had a plan and a purpose that ultimately God was going to use, but he had to discipline the man if to prepare him for that position. And that's an interesting thing when we consider that in regards to who Yeshua is as the man that God used and raised up and seated at his right hand to rule over the whole kingdom that God has established called the earth. That's all.
Well, you know, on that note, did you ever think that Yeshua had a dysfunctional family? How would you like to grow up as a sibling of Yeshua?
They didn't believe him.
No. Well, I mean, they actually at one time they even said, "We've come to take you because you're crazy and they're going to kill you." Right? And they tried to haul him away. So yes, God uses whatever he has to use to get people into the condition so that he can use them for his purpose. Down and dirty, right?
Excuse me.
Yes.
Debbie, do you have your hand up? Debbie? Go ahead, Debbie. She keeps her hand up.
You know, it's really interesting though, because even though you see that the brothers were angry, they were livid with Joseph, they never addressed Joseph. It was all behind their back, behind his back. It was the animosity building that had actually built it to the point where they wanted to kill him, right? The Torah says you shall not hate your brother in your heart. When anger is kept in our heart, it festers and it can become toxic. Now, you know, people who harbor anger will end up with no friends and no love in their lives. So, but we need to know how to express that anger and toward whom to express it and how to express it. The deliverance again, right? But anger should never be allowed to focus or to fester. We should either let it go or learn to properly express it. You know, what we read is Joseph's father, even though he admonished him, he kept these things in his mind. He never did address them with Joseph. We've covered it in the discussion? I'm sorry. So God took him from arrogance to humility to blessings. Yes, ma'am.
I can make a couple points, but
He never addressed the issue of anger even with his brother.
No.
never.
He knew his brother hated him, and yet he let year after year go by without saying, hey, you know, let's sit down and hash this out.
Right. Never. No. You know, but how many times are we told to suck up? Suck it up. You know, suck it up. Oh, I'm really mad. Well, just suck it up. You're not supposed to get mad. Nowhere in the world does it say don't get mad. It says deal with it.
It says be angry, be angry.
Be angry, but not sin. So we have to learn how to deal with it, to resolve it.
You gotta control your anger. Keep it under control. You know, there's a lot in this that we really need to learn in our own lives. How many families have contention? Probably every one.
If we're honest.
I don't think there's,
If we're
yeah.
honest.
Anyone not?
Yeah, does anyone not? That's really the question. But how are we dealing with it? And how are we reconciling? You know, we're here right now because we have been called to a higher standard. But are we standing up to that standard? You know, we've been called to show what Joseph was like in the end. We're called to show what Yeshua was like and how he dealt with his family. You know, Carol mentioned it earlier, but can you imagine growing up in the household with Yeshua? He does no wrong. He's the example of this family, and we're all trying to grow up, but I don't see it that way. I just can't imagine. I know even it was a custom back when I was a kid. If somebody was really trying to do right, you'd call them a goody two-shoes. Well, is that what they were calling Yeshua? You know? You know.
Sandals.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. But how would it be, you know, every mistake you make is amplified because your brother is doing no wrong.
Even if they never pointed it out to you.
Even if they never
You
pointed
still
it out.
felt it.
Plus your parents saw it. Your parents knew about it. So was there contention in that family? I think obviously. Again, when we read that the brothers didn't know who he was, wouldn't accept him at first. Why was that? Because of the contention in the family. It wasn't until afterwards that they were reconciled and they became full believers. But the same with Joseph. He went through a lot. When he was sent up to Shechem, and we already went through this, but he knew he was going into an area with a lot of trouble. We know that that's where his sons killed all the men. There was still contention there. So why did he send him up there alone? And that was addressed. When he got there, though, this is what's interesting. When he got there, he couldn't find anybody. They were gone. And he was about ready to give up and go home when, quote, a man appeared to him. Well, guess what? As the rabbis say, that was an angel. The angel came to him because when he said, I can't find my brothers, he knew exactly who he was talking about. Well, who else would have known that? But he knew. So God had a plan, even though it didn't look well for Joseph. He went, and his brothers saw him coming. Well, why is it they saw him coming in the distance before he saw them? Number one, the coat. That made him stand out. That made him separate. And again, what's the purpose of the coat? It's status. That's the status you have within your family, within your organization, whatever. Well, the first thing they did, they removed the coat. That says they reduced him in status. They said, you're no longer over us. You're no longer going to appear like you're over us. So they were going to kill him. But they said, no. Actually, Judas told him, no, we can't do that. The blood would be on our hands. So what did they do? They threw him in a cistern. Why did they throw him in a cistern? because they still wanted to kill him. A dry cistern is the home for snakes and scorpions. They said, he's got no hope in there, but this will take the blood off of our hands. Not really, but that's what their thinking was. But even that didn't work, because again, God's hand was there. That's when he was sold. And we know from there he went down to Egypt. But in one of your fill-ins here, well, let me go back to the first one. I guess that is the first one. Removing his coat means it reduced his status.
What's number 8?
But there are 3 reasons.
Yeah, I missed that for some
It's
reason.
on mine, I think.
It's on yours?
Yeah, 3A. Do we expect?
Oh, 3A. What happened to B?
Yeah, he just said it.
2B,
2B, yeah, 2B?
yeah.
2B is Joseph shared his dreams with his brothers.
Oh, okay.
And one,
Praise behold, I think.
yeah. And in 3A,
What was 1? B,
Oh, B1.
B1.
Behold,
Behold,
yeah,
now you're at 3A.
Okay.
okay, now we're at 3A. Let's see, what was 3A? That's one I omitted, unfortunately.
Results of contention.
Yeah. Do we expect good results? Well, do we expect good results from contention in our relations? How can we have good results if our relationships are contentious? You know, and we say, well, they are this way or they are that way. Okay. But as far as it is up to me, am I making a difference? As far as it is up to me, can I break through this? People are always going to be contentious at some point. But it's up to us to make the difference. Now, the other thing with this is, Joseph was put into a trial here. He was put into a point where, oh my gosh, they're trying to kill me. What am I going to do? What choices do I have? What can I do to get out of this? Well, I think this is one of the first trials that God let him go through for a reason. God gives us trials, or lets us go, he doesn't give us trials, but God lets us go through trials in order to build our faith. If we can't resolve it ourselves, what do we have to do? We got to turn to him. We got to pray. We got to say, Father, I don't know what to do in this situation, but I know you will take me through. If I rely on myself, there's no way. If I was thrown into a pit with snakes and scorpions, my first reaction would probably be to try to get out of there myself.
Yeah.
I mean, what else do you do?
Even if there's no snakes.
right.
Even if there's no snakes.
Your brothers are gonna kill you at some point.
Absolutely. But what is the first step? I'm not going to make it. I've got to trust in God.
Paul had a comment.
All right?
Pastor Paul?
Pastor Paul. Nothing?
All right, I had to unmute myself.
Oh, okay.
Just going back to what you said about when they stripped him of his coat,
Yes,
If we remember with Yeshua, they also stripped him and then scourged him.
absolutely.
Interestingly enough, who ended up with his garment?
The Gentiles.
Remember, it was the Romans
Yep.
that were casting lots to see who got the garment.
Yep. Exactly.
Think that through just for a moment and realize what the Roman Catholic Church has done with the Messianic Savior.
That's exactly what's happened. If you notice, most of the Catholic priests, they will emulate those garments. They are the ones that have the robes. But it's exactly what happened. Yeshua robe was given to the Gentiles, was taken by the Gentiles, actually. So his status, because his robe was also his status, and I don't know how many remember, but he was given a very special robe as he was going through his ministry. This is the robe that was taken from him. Why wasn't it torn off or just thrown away like the other people's? Because it was special. Because it had meaning. They cast lots for it. We need to keep that in mind. But in fill in C, Joseph had to figure a way out or trust Adonai. That was his first step. This was his first step in changing from his arrogance to being able to say, God, you're in control.
I need help.
I need help. I can't do it myself. And again, is that what we do? It is what we should do, but how often do we not do it? Without God's help, we'd be lost. Unfortunately, again, I think it's one of the characteristics of a lot of men and several women also, but we run into a situation and we say, well, I can fix it. You know, I can do this. No matter what it is, I can do it. I can get through it. Instead of relying on God.
Pastor Paul, go ahead.
Okay, Pastor Paul.
I don't have anything. I just forgot to put my hand down.
Oh, okay, okay. All right. Maria has something.
Thank you.
You know, after reading this, I kept thinking, what was the difference between Jacob and Joseph? Now, Jacob was taught the Torah
Yes.
by his father for 63 years, one-on-one basis.
Yeah.
Then he went to Jerusalem, and for 14 years he studied under Shem. I mean, he had a college, a university degree on Torah, but yet a 17-year-old was able to change.
Yeah.
I mean, from black to white. What was it? And it just came to me what the pastor said. Wineskin.
Exactly.
He was able to reach the truth and change. Jacob, probably by his age at 63, said, I know it all. I lived through it. I have studied it. I have a degree on it. And nobody is going to change me.
You're right.
So I think it's not how much we study the Torah, it's how much we are able to change to the message of the Torah.
Exactly. That's exactly right. You can learn all about it. In fact, you see a lot of the pastors out there that are very astute, that know the New Testament inside and out, but don't
Memorize the books.
but don't know how to apply it.
Don't know what it says.
My wife has an example of one of the students that she was in class with who had memorized the book of
our professor,
a professor that had memorized the book of
John.
John verbatim, but was not really cognizant of the context of the word. So you're exactly right, Maria. It's not the knowledge. It's the being able to work through it and to enter into it.
Actors that play biblical roles and things.
Absolutely.
They're very persuasive, but they don't know the Lord.
Exactly.
Pastor Paul. Go ahead, Pastor Paul.
Yeah, I do have something this time.
Okay.
All right. In the Brit Hadashah, we call it a Rhema Word of God.
Yes.
And when you receive a Rhema Word of God, you know exactly that God is speaking to you personally about that subject.
Yes.
Well, in the Torah, in the beginning scriptures we have, I don't know what the Hebrew word is for that, but it's the very same concept. When God speaks to you directly, there is no denying it and no misunderstanding for you. But it is a message for you. How you are able to convey it to others, like with Moses. Moses spoke with God face to face.
Correct.
But he had trouble from time to time conveying that to the people to whom he was to bring the message. And as we know, he got out of control. His anger got involved, and it cost him from being the one to lead them into the land. So I would say that for all of us, no matter if we're reading in the Torah or the Brit Hadashah, we can all read it. We can all hear it. But until it becomes a Rhema word that is your word, it is just what you believe. It's not you operating in the faith.
You're absolutely right. In fact, that goes on to right into my next point. When we look at Yeshua, he was the Word, but how did he present it? He presented, like Pastor says, he presented the essence of the law. And when you look at the Sadducees, especially the Sadducees, in that era, they were the learned people. They were the ones that knew the Torah. They were the ones that set the boundaries. They were the ones that you came to for advice. They were the ones that were supposed to know it all and be it all. Yet Yeshua taught the essence. He was the one that made the word alive. He knew how to present it. And he knew how to get people into it. So when your next fill in here, Yeshua taught the essence of the law. The Sadducees taught the letter.
Well, now that God has dealt with Joseph, and we know that he went to prison, that, I don't want to go there, that's yours, that he was taken captive. Now, here's this young man who was very arrogant. I'm sure he had the best of everything.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, he is purchased, drug up from the well. And it's really interesting if you do some research. The brothers didn't take him out of the well. They left him in the well. They said, okay, we'll sell him to you. If you want him out of the well, you get it, because we're not going to put our hands on it. We don't want to be part of that part of it. We'll take the money, right? But we don't want that part of it, which is really ironic because Judas took the money, but didn't want any part of what was going to happen.
And we notice it was
To
the same
Yeshua.
amount of money.
It was the same amount of money that he was sold for.
Could you clarify that for me on 28? Because what I have read, half of them say the brothers took him out of the well and sold him,
Yeah.
and the other rabbis say it was the traders that took him out and sold him. It wasn't the brothers.
Traders or traders?
Both.
Trader Joe.
Right. Well, we also have some, a little bit of contention because he was sold to the Ishmaelites,
Yeah.
but it says the Midians took him out.
Right, the Midians
Took him out.
sold him to the Ishmaelites.
And sold him. So we see kind of to me, a broad scope of people that were involved. It wasn't just one person, one tribe that was involved with the captivity of Joseph. It was two tribes. It was the Midianites and it was the Ishmaelites. And we know that what tribe came eventually from the Midianites? Well, but we also know that the Amalekites were part of that group too. So these are people that were contentious against Abraham and that whole tribe to begin with. So it was not just one tribe was involved. Just like with Yeshua, it wasn't just the Sadducees, or it wasn't just the Pharisees, or it wasn't just the common man, but a group of people were involved in trying to put him under, basically. But from what my word says, and I kind of like the New American Standard, it says that it was the Midianites who pulled him up out of the well and then sold him. But you know, the other part about it, and I was just thinking as I was sitting there, the brothers really washed their hands of the whole thing. Because, I mean, how easy would it be for them just to say to their father, well, you know, we don't know what happened to him. He just never showed up. Right?
Probably would've been better for them because they showed him the.
Right.
They know his
The
father.
grief.
They know that they were involved.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay.
Am I on?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, in verse 28, it's really not clear. It could be either his brothers or the Midianites that drew him out of the cistern.
Well, it says they.
Yeah.
So if I was looking at the pronouns back, the reference would have been the Midianites, but it could have been both. They could have helped him out. Absolutely. They could have pulled
both
him.
of them.
Right.
Or either one.
Right. Or they could have had the brothers,
How do you conclude that it was the Midianites?
because I look at the pronouns. In verse 28 it says, then some Midianites, traders, passed by. So they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit, and then they sold him to the Ishmaelites.
And the Midianites could have been the ones that received the 20 pieces
Right.
of silver from the Ishmaelites.
Right. Right. It's a little confusing there, but my best suggestion would be to look at and follow the pronouns from several verses up on. Pronouns are important. But you know, just stop and think. The brothers could have said, well, he never showed up. We don't know what happened to him. You sent him up to Shechem with all the robbers and he was all dressed to the teeth. You sent him up to Shechem. Or they could have said, you know, we came across him and he'd fallen into the cistern and the snakes and the scorpions had killed him. Right? They could have said all these other things, but just look at the damage, the injury, the grief that it was brought to his father. It wasn't just, well, you know, this was an accident that happened and his father would grieve, but the terror that the son would have experienced, or what the father thought the son would have experienced by being torn apart by a lion. So it was kind of like, we got you back. You know, which again is a terrible sign of dysfunction. You know, even in the death. Yes, ma'am.
If you notice, they never tell the father that he was killed. They just
No.
brought it. They just brought it in, and they told the father, "Look, identify this."
Yes.
And then the father said, "Oh, that's his turn.
Right.
He's dead."
Right.
But I read on this, and the early writings. I can't tell you where it is because my head isn't all there. They slaughtered a goat And if you look at the Leviticus, the sacrifices, you slaughter a goat on the day of Yom Kippur. They brought this in on the 7th day of the 10th day of the 7th month, which is Yom Kippur. So all this came up on the Day of Atonement.
It's really interesting when God works. He doesn't leave any ends untied, does he? Very, very detailed. But so this arrogant, rich young man now became a piece of meat to be bought in the slave market. Big comeuppance, right? And of course we know that because of this, his attitude, everything changed. From this point on, we see Joseph as a very humble man, according to God, what and truly God had done. And we see this with the dreams. Potiphar made him his personal servant. Now, this didn't come about just, I'm going to buy this kid off the slave market and bring him into my home and put him in charge of everything. He had to prove himself, and he proved his humility. He proved his faithfulness. He earned Potiphar's trust to be put into that position, because the only thing Potiphar had to worry about was the food he ate. And the interesting thing about that is that, excuse me, the Potiphar, the Egyptians, had a unique diet, let's put it that way. And that he didn't want, one of the things was, is a Jew didn't touch it. Especially somebody who was a shepherd. I mean, that was like the scum of the earth. So the only thing that Potiphar had to worry about his entire home was the fact that I want to make sure I'm still eating appropriately. And he turned everything over to him. Everything. He put his trust in him. But we're going to find out that it wasn't necessarily Potiphar that brought Joseph back into prison.
Here's where we can see that Joseph ran into more temptations. When he was in Potiphar's house, he was elevated to a pretty high position. He was equivalent to Potiphar in that house. But one thing we don't realize, one of the words that describes Potiphar was that he was an officer in Pharaoh's army. Well, that word isn't really officer. The word in Hebrew is saras. And what does saras mean? It means eunuch. So he was a eunuch.
A eunuch?
A eunuch. Why does this really make any difference? Well, a lot of the sages say that he was married very young and made a eunuch later. But what does that do to his wife? I mean, going through that period of life when she's supposed to be alive, and that's got to be very frustrating. Well, is this one of the reasons why she came to Joseph? Now, it says in the word that Joseph was a very handsome man, very well presented, and obviously he was very high ranking at that point. So why wouldn't you cry? I kind of feel sorry for her in a way because of the position that she was put in, but the way she did it was really terrible. Yes?
That seems to me really bad judgment call.
Yeah? Well, sure.
Setting them up for, a failure.
It absolutely was.
And I didn't even know a eunuch could be married.
Well, that's why they say he was probably married before he became a eunuch.
None of the officers in Egypt's court that were allowed access into the palace, they were all eunuchs.
So it was more than likely when he was promoted to that position. But unfortunately, that has the effect on the whole family. Yes, Maria?
This is a story from Pastor Bruce.
Okay.
He can add it to his repertoire. When she got Joseph, it says that most of the people and the men were out because it was a festival, and everyone was engaged in this festival, which included a lot of fornication. This festival fell on that particular time on December 25th, Christmas. It's a Christmas story for you, Pastor Bruce.
Anyway, in your first fill-in there, the word for officer in the Hebrew is the word saris, S-A-R-I-S, meaning eunuch.
Where you at?
Oh, down here in, how do you spell it?
E-U-N-U-C-H.
No.
S-A-R-I-S. Yeah, this is in 5A.
I think I missed the whole section.
Yeah, so did I.
We missed all
That
of
was
number
Carol's.
four. We didn't get four.
Yeah, we didn't
I'm
get
so
far out.
sorry. We got all busy.
Well, because we're running out of time.
Yeah. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. The name Adonai is used throughout most of this chapter, and it indicates that Adonai was actively involved in looking after Joseph.
Sorry, we're trying to rush. We know that the teacher coming in next is kind of pushes us out in a hurry.
I'm sorry, who was number C again, 4C?
That this indicates that Adonai was actively involved in looking after Joseph.
Okay. We see also through this that Joseph had learned enough at this point that he was not going to mistrust Adonai or not going to step out against him. When he was approached, he says, I will not disgrace my Lord. I will not disgrace Adonai. And that's when he fled. And she grabbed his coat, and we know the story from there. He was he was lied about and thrown into prison. Another trial. And I think it's really important for us to realize that this is the way God works. If we're not going down the path that God set for us, he will set us up so that we will have to go to him and have to do what he wants. But in this particular case, the only way he could be elevated was to be subjugated. Once you're subjugated, you can be lifted up.
God has to do that with us sometimes.
Absolutely. When he was thrown into the prison, why? That's when he learned about the baker and the winemaker, or the cupbearer. Thank you. If he wasn't thrown in the prison, he would never learn about him. So what's important about that? That's when he revealed that he could interpret dreams. That's when he was shown by God, this is a gift I have from you. These are the people I have for you to be in touch with. The one thing we need to look from this is that through all of this, and this is in fill in B, Joseph passed his trials and remained faithful. When you pass your trials, turning to God in everything, that's when he can bless you. We can go through trials and start complaining and carrying on and whatever, say, oh, woe is me. That's not going to get God's blessing. That's not going to get us out of the trials. It's when we step in and say, God, you're in control. It's all up to you.
Well, you know, the next thing that happens, of course, we know, is God gave Joseph the ability to interpret dreams. Isn't it interesting that he came to his brother saying, behold, I have had a dream twice, and yet he interprets 2 dreams in the prison. You know, I'm going to make sure I get through everything. We see that he was imprisoned with the baker and the cupbearer, both from Pharaoh's court. Now, we all know what a baker does. He bakes, right? And a cupbearer, he's the person that makes sure that the Pharaoh's wine hasn't been poisoned, basically. What he does is, you know, he tastes it, and if he doesn't drop dead, then it's okay for the Pharaoh to have it. And why were they in prison? Well, the rabbis say in the Midrash that the baker allowed a stone to be found in a piece of bread that was delivered to Pharaoh, and the cupbearer that there was a fly in the cup that Pharaoh had, that Pharaoh was given. And that seems, you know, a little bit strange. We would say, you're going to put him in prison for that? Well, you know, yes, because they say, well, you know, Pharaoh could have cracked his tooth. He could have swallowed the fly. And I think there's a nursery rhyme about that. Perhaps he'll die, right? But they were waiting to see what would be their final judgment. And while they were in prison, they both had similar dreams. And they both have, there's a lot of 3s in there. And I don't really have time to go over them, but it's really interesting. There was 3 vines, there was 3 branches, right? There were 3 buds, and there was 3 clusters of grapes. And for the baker, there was 3 baskets of bread on his head. So there's a lot of interesting things here about 3. They were waiting for the final results. Well, Yeshua was in the tomb 3 days before the judgment of his resurrection took place. We still see a lot of that going on. You know, it's really interesting that though they were similar, they were so different. When they brought the dreams to Joseph, and it's because he was favored in the prison. I mean, he was made in charge of all the prisoners. And the guard never had to worry about anybody escaping. He prepared the food, the whole thing. But Joseph responded with humility. No longer did he say, well, I can tell you the meaning of those dreams. He said, only God can interpret these dreams. You see how far God has taken Joseph? Absolutely.
From arrogance to humility.
Right, from arrogance to humility. And, you know, life humbles most people. And it's becoming increasingly apparent that the formerly arrogant young Joseph is becoming a changed person throughout this. He could never have been used by Pharaoh to do what he had done to save Egypt, basically, and then to save his family, if there hadn't been a change from arrogance to humility. You know, there's very 2 apparent moral benefits that comes from his change. One is regarding our special talents as gifts from God in humility. You know, he didn't announce, I can interpret these dreams, but it was in humility. And the second one, I'm going to make sure I'm giving these. The baker and the cupbearer both had similar dreams. Joseph displayed humility. Only God can interpret dreams. And there's 2 important moral benefits First of all is the humility. Second is using your gift in the service of God. We all know of secular people who use their gift, and it's definitely a God-given gift, in a very secular manner. But there's real no benefit to that. It's really interesting that that Bach was probably the most gifted composer there was in history. And he said many times that his whole purpose of composing these beautiful songs was to bring glory to God. And his gift is still blessing the world today. We have to stop and think also, well, what's the difference? What was the difference in the interpretation of the dream? One was that the cupbearer, it's interesting that the cupbearer said, give me my dream, the meaning of my dream first, because that allowed the baker to say, boy, he got a good result. I'm going to pop in there too. But the cupbearer, his dream, he said, I will lift up your head. Pharaoh will lift up your head, and he will return the cup to your hand, and you will put the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Well, boy, the baker said, this sounds really good. I'm going to pop right in there too, because he's handing out good reports today. But if you read it very closely, the 3 baskets on his head, he had birds coming and eating the bread from the top basket. And it says in Joseph's interpretation that Pharaoh will lift off your head. So very different meaning, lifting up and lifting off. So I'm sure that this wasn't happy news for the baker, correct? Now, the poor, unfortunate baker, stop and think about this. He had 3 days to contemplate what was going to happen to him. I'm sure he's saying, I wish I hadn't said anything. I didn't really want to know this was going on. But he had 3 days to contemplate that he was going to actually be hung or impaled on a post, and then he was going to have his head lifted off. Now, in the Egyptian culture, the body in death was something very, very special. They went to all kinds of things to mummify it and to preserve it and do everything for it. They really honored. So to have his head lifted off was a real desecration. So not only did he have to wait to be impaled on a stake, which doesn't sound too cool, but he was going to have his body desecrated afterwards. Now, it came about. In 3 days, Pharaoh called him into the court, and he did. He put the cup back into the cupbearer's hand, and he actually lopped off the baker's head. Now, one of the things that we need to remember is that as we looked in chapter 40, verse 23, it says, I'm trying to hurry. Joseph asked the cupbearer to please remember him to Pharaoh. Pharaoh probably didn't even know he was in prison. I mean, I'm sure that Potiphar didn't go announce him that I put my servant in prison, But he said, please, when you get to prison, remind Pharaoh of who I am and that I am here on no reason, no good reason. The cupbearer got so involved with his good fortune that he forgot Joseph. He forgot him for 2 years. Joseph remained in prison for 2 years. Then, of course, Pharaoh had a dream. He said, I know somebody, when it benefited him. But we have to remember that one of the things we need to do is keep our memories diligently alive. We all have memories of how God has worked in our lives. This is a story about God working in a young man's life for him to be made into a vessel that was usable for salvation. Not only salvation for his family, but salvation for the nation. And that's what Yeshua came for. He came for the salvation of the nation of Israel, and we benefit from it because of their rejection. Rabbis say that if they had accepted him at that time, his messianic kingdom would have been set up. But we are the receivers of their misfortune, let's put it that way. But we need to keep our memories diligent also. When God has worked in your life, we need to remember them. You know, if God has done a miracle back here, can he do it again? If God's gotten you out of financial issues here, can he do it again? Has God healed you here? Can he do it again? You know, our memories are so short. The Israelites had a thing. They put up an Ebenezer. Whenever God did something amazing, they put up an Ebenezer so that whoever passed it, it would bring back to remembrance something that happened and it to praise God about. Do we put up Ebenezers in our life? I'm sure we don't put up stones everywhere we go. But do we put up Ebenezers in our life? I have an Ebenezer in our backyard. God gave me that house as a single woman. Have you ever looked at something you just knew it was yours, that God wanted you to have it? Well, I was buying my house and I was traveling and I was never home, and probably the only real estate deal that ever was done without you ever meeting. But I passed by that house and I said, that's my house. That's my house. And God gave me that house. So I have an Ebenezer in the backyard. I'll never ever forget that as a single woman, I was able to purchase a home. My dad, I never lived in a home that was owned, being military, right? Married military, never lived in a home that was my own. God blessed me with permanence. He said, this is where I have placed you. When my son had cancer, I wrote it in my Bible. On this day, I prayed. Below it I wrote, on this day, cancer-free. It says here, God provided for all his needs. Write it down. On this day, I have claimed that God will provide for all my needs. Not me, but God will provide. When that check comes in, God sent it. Right? I'm lonely. Now, I never was this. I was never looking for a husband when God gave me my husband, which was a blessing, but I wasn't looking. But, you know, if God has said that you have a spouse out there, he will give you a helpmate suited for you. Write it down. Keep those memories in front of us. Keep them diligently so that we never, ever forget. It says in the Word, write it down on a tablet, that when you run, you may see it and never stumble. We need to do that. We need to do that in our lives. When God has done a miracle in our life, just like he did with Joseph, when God has done a miracle in our life, never, ever, ever, ever let it go. And speak of it so others will know the grace, the strength, the power, the faithfulness of God in each of our lives. Just as he showed Joseph his strength, his grace, and his faithfulness by using him and what he went through to bless not only his family, not only the nation, but the world. And that's our Torah study for today. Oh, D is memories. Memories must be diligently kept alive. And as we've been talking throughout the entire Torah study, Yosef is a paradigm. Not only a paradigm of Yeshua, but he's a paradigm of the Jewish people. How many times have they been blessed? How many times have they prospered? How many times have they been a nation, a strong, powerful nation, only to be subjected to Nazism, to communism, to even their own disobedience and being taken into slavery, to repent and to be restored? And he does the same for us today. Even in the worst conditions, and we can all say we've come from dysfunctional families, we've had terrible things happen in our lives, but God is a God of restoration. So thank you very much.
Good job.